Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I heartily want to welcome you at our today's AIES talk and also ATA talk, because there will be followers not only from Austria, but also from all over Europe and even beyond. People heavily interested in what is going on in Ukraine, heavily interested in the issue of our today's talk, Ukraine under Russian aggression. And I have the great pleasure to welcome, especially also our today's speaker. This is the former minister, and as I usually call him, it is the Mr. Foreign Policy of Ukraine, Borys Tarasyuk. Heartily welcome to you, Borys.
Thank you. Grüß Gott.
Yeah,
And I'm privileged, Werner, to be invited for this conference. This is not the first time we are meeting, and the AIES is a very prestigious institution. I'm very thankful for the invitation.
yeah. Maybe just a few words, to Borys Tarasyuk's career. He studied international relations and international law in Kiev and joined the diplomatic service. From the beginning of Ukraine as an independent state, he got into very important foreign policy functions. He became a deputy foreign minister, a first deputy foreign minister. Then he became ambassador to Belgium and to NATO and to the Netherlands, and insofar was heavily involved, of course, in all the questions of European integration. Afterwards, he became a deputy at the National Parliamentary Assembly, and of course, he was responsible for foreign policy questions, especially he also used to be the head of the European Integration Committee. And in 1989, he became Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ukraine once again. Afterwards, the 3 years thereafter, he became a deputy. And then once again, he became minister between 2005 and 2007 for foreign affairs. And his career did not stop, but he got back into the Rada, the National Assembly. And since 2019, he is the permanent representative of Ukraine to the Council of Europe. So far, you can imagine it's 30 years of very intense foreign policy activities by Borys. One only can congratulate you to your performance. And this is also the reason why we ask you, to tell us a little bit. And the first question I really want to ask you, when a few weeks this build-up, this military build-up started alongside the Ukrainian border from Russian troops, there started also big discussions all over Europe and in the United States and in other countries, of course. What does it mean? Is it only a saber rattling, or is more behind it? And especially in Europe, many people thought, especially at the beginning, okay, it's more or less, just a trial, Putin's trial to impress or to develop pressure against Ukraine somehow. But there is not really a big danger. And many people in Austria and all over Europe maybe thought that the Americans and also NATO were exaggerating when they talked about the real danger of invasion. And so far, my first question would be, how do you see this military build-up? How do you see the present situation? How dangerous is this situation for Ukraine and the Ukrainian nation?
Thank you, Werner. Let me remind you that during these recent days we are witnessing and reading a lot of pieces of information, and Ukraine and the situation around Ukraine and military buildup of Russia around Ukraine is number one news story. But let me remind you that Ukraine is already conducting a war imposed by Russia for 8 years. 8 years the war is going on. And do not forget about this, because this is the war which is not probably visible in the world and in Europe even. But the war is going on. As a result of this war, already 14,000 Ukrainians were killed. 1.5 million Ukrainians became internally displaced persons. And this is a serious, human problems for those people. And our state has to deal with those category of people. Around 23,000 military were wounded. So these are just the figures which we are already have behind us and with us. At the same time, the recent buildup of Russian buildup is unprecedented. Even in the history of 30 years history of Ukraine, independence of Ukraine, we are having the war which continues longer than the Second World War on our territory. That is from 41 to 44. We are already 8 years in war. Of course, Ukrainian armed forces are not the same as they used to be at the beginning of the aggression. But currently, talking about the accumulation of military forces, Russian military, I will bring to your attention some figures. For example, there are close to Ukrainian border, the distance is different from 40 to 120 kilometers from Ukrainian border, 119,000 ground troops, Russian ground troops, with all military hardware, and 21,000 of the military personnel from the Air Force and Russian Navy. So altogether 140,000. Also, Russia is saying that as a pretext for this military buildup, they are conducting military maneuvers. But it is not natural that such a long period of time they are conducting military maneuvers. Also, from the 10th of February till 20th of February, Russia, together with Belarus, will conduct military maneuvers in Belarus. For this purpose, they are taking the forces from far east of Russia. So, and these military maneuvers will be held for about 10 days. So what will come out of it? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what is in Putin's mind. So this is a very serious situation, and Ukraine and our friends, including in NATO and the European Union, never saw, and this is unprecedented military buildup. What is the purpose of this military buildup? Of course, not to show the Russian military strength. Of course, this is in order to intimidate not only us Ukrainians, but to intimidate the whole democratic world, including NATO. And so this is a very dangerous situation in terms of geopolitics, because it endangers not only Ukraine, it endangers peace and stability not only in Central and Eastern Europe, but in Europe as a whole.
Yeah, I only can agree from my experience as a former defense minister. I mean, the build-up, of terrestrial forces and air forces, the tanks and artillery and the fighter aircraft and the helicopters, and in the last phase, now even military hospitals, blood reserves, and so on. They are strong signals that it is not only exercises, but it is much, much more. And also the fact that troops from all parts of the country, even from the Far East, from the Pacific Ocean region, are coming towards abroad to right close to the Ukrainian border are signals that it is more. And also the question of they have accumulated already 86 battle groups, specialized battle groups that usually are intended to be used for invasion is certainly an alarm signal. And what you mentioned now, that probably the intention is not only to endanger Ukraine, but also it is a danger for Western Europe and for the stability of the Western world. So far, my question is, what do you see as the main reasons? What is Putin's motivation to do so at this moment? What are the backgrounds? What are the global and the regional intentions of Russian politics?
Yes, this is a very interesting subject. What are the motivations of Putin? Why Moscow is doing this recent months? In order to give the answer to this question, one has to look at the history of Ukrainian-Russian relationship and to understand the motivation of Russian political elite, and not only now, but throughout the centuries. For example, what is the root causes of Russian political elite throughout the centuries? I'm not talking about these recent months or years. Their motivation is being based on the traditional, centuries, years long Russian military expansion. So this was and continues to be the major, so to say, scenario for the development of what we call now Russia. By the way, the name Russia appeared in 1721 by the decree of Peter the Great, who renamed the country which was known for centuries as Moscovia or Moscow Kingdom to Russia. Why Russia? Because it is the pretension for our Ukrainian history, because there was no Russia until 1721, and at the same time, Russians are trying to assert itself as a superpower. They understand they have the complex, and they understand that they are not the superpower they want to be. They understand that they do not have the respect they are waiting for. Absolutely groundless. But this is the reality. The quest to assert itself in the globe as a superpower. Russians are trying to impose to the world the division of spheres of influence. They pretend that they have the sphere of influence of the former Soviet Union and beyond, as it used to be the case before beginning of 90s. And of course, they have already now under their subordination Belarus. And in fact, we may not speak about Belarus as an independent country. It is now a part of Imperial Russia. So the case of at the beginning of January of Kazakhstan also was yet another proof that Russians are trying to impose their rule on so-called near abroad. And Ukraine is the key factor in this imperial quest. They understand that without Ukraine there will be no empire. They wish to have an empire. And Putin is dreaming to return to the former Soviet Union under probably this different name. Sorry. Also, their motivation is the fear of success of democratic and successful Ukraine, which will be seen in Russia for political elite as a dangerous phenomenon that will probably lead millions of Russians to repeat Ukrainians' example, to be a democratic country. So this is one of the reasons. And the last I would name, the complex of being not so nationally identical nation. Because Russia is not nationally identical nation. So this is one of the reasons why they are trying to rewrite the history and to claim that a part of Ukrainian history, which used to be Rus, by the way, until, centuries ago, and later in the 15th, 16th, Ukraine, which is now Ukraine, was renamed as Ukraine or land of Cossacks. Well, and they are looking for this, for their national identity. And this is the reason why they are trying to impose what was a part of Kievan Rus history, our history, Ukrainian history, to be a part of their history. So this, by the way, was vividly shown during a recent article of Putin when he was trying to acquaint Russia with Ukraine, or vice versa. So this is a complex. They are being sick of the lack of national identity. And they are trying to fill the gap with somebody else history, like Ukrainian history.
Yeah. I mean, this Putin's dream of shaping a greater Russian empire, including also Belarus and Ukraine, certainly has to be taken serious. You know, this was one of the points when in last summer he made his historic speech and talked about Adin Narod, about one people, meaning Russians and Ukrainians as one people, was a clear indication that there was a strategic vision behind probably also the activities between this biggest military build-up since World War II. Since the end of World War II, Europe has not seen such a military build-up as we are experiencing now. And insofar, it has to be taken seriously. There might also be other reasons, you know, of course, I don't know, closing 3 TV stations in Ukraine that were more or less Russian-minded or whatever. Of course, you always will find reasons to do so, but I cannot see any really strong and important reason for such a military potential aggression. And insofar, we have to be prepared. And my question is, you know, how do you see it? Is Ukraine prepared for The worst case is NATO prepared for the worst case, because obviously Putin tried to use a very sensitive phase. On the one hand, we are in American politics just a few months after the Americans had their specific experience in Afghanistan, and we are looking already forward to the midterm elections. We had elections in Germany, a new government. France will have elections in just 2 months, and in Great Britain, Premier Johnson is hanging between the ropes, as I would say, and insofar he probably also tried to use a specific political situation and also a situation that is in favor for Russia. If you look, of course, now we are in winter. He can develop some pressure, maybe with his gas deliveries more than usually. He has, quite a good financial situation, and insofar the tactical situation is quite good for him. But Putin made already very strong strategic mistakes. And the one he made was certainly in 2014. You spoke about, when he made his first aggression against Ukraine, not only overtaking Crimea, but also the military aggression in Donbass, in Donetsk and Luhansk, because as far as I have experienced this was the point where he really shaped a very strong common Ukrainian national awareness and the conviction that the Ukrainians have to stick together, whether they speak Ukrainian language or Russian language, and they have to defend their country. And maybe he's making a similar mistake, strategic mistake now, even if maybe some tactical reasons are in favor for him. So far, my question is, how well prepared is Ukraine at the moment, and how do you see the development in the coming days and weeks?
Before answering this question, I would like to share with you your vision that Putin's aggression in 2014 increased the national consciousness of Ukrainian nation. Never ever before the support within the Ukrainian society was so strong for NATO membership and EU membership. Now the majority of Ukrainians are in favor of joining NATO. About the preparedness, of course, the Russian invasion in 2014 forced us to make lessons from this aggression. The Ukrainian armed forces were very weak in 2014, and Putin, through Yanukovych, did all their best in order to weaken Ukrainian armed forces. And this was a kind of preparation for the 2014 military attack against Ukraine in the Crimea and in Donetsk and Luhansk. So, what is the situation currently? Currently, the situation is absolutely different. According to the experts, military experts, Ukrainian armed forces belong to 10 strongest armies in Europe, accounting around 250,000 military. And recently the president announced the plans to increase Ukrainian armed forces for 100,000 more. That would mean more than 350,000 military. Also, Ukraine during these years introduced by its military industrial complex a lot of new samples of military hardware. And this is a very serious factor and difference. At the end of last year, Ukrainian parliament, on the proposal by the president, approved a law on the forces of territorial defense. So these forces of territorial defense started to being established, and by the mid of this month, they have to be completely rolled out. So that means that in 25 regions, there will be 25 brigades of territorial forces under the command of Supreme Commander of Armed Forces. So they are not going to be, a kind of forces without any command. They will have their command. The command structure already was established on the places in 25 regions, that is 25 brigades. So the peaceful time, the territorial forces will account 10,000. But in the special period like now, it is going to be 130,000 strong army. Don't forget that more than 400,000 Ukrainians military Ukrainians went through this operation of special forces resisting Russian aggression in Lugansk and Donetsk region. So that means that this is a 400,000 military ready for the combat operations. Also, of course, we cannot rely on our own forces only, because one cannot compare military build-up, military potential of Ukraine and that of Russia. Russian armed forces are the second largest in the world. That's why we have no other choice but to rely, first of all, on ourselves. Nobody is going to fight for us. At the same time, we are relying ourselves on the support from our friends. And only during recent days, we received the military ammunition and hardware from around 10 countries, amount of 1,000 tons of military ammunition and different military hardware, including modern grenade rocket launchers, Javelin from the United States, Enlau from United Kingdom, and from Poland and many other countries. So I'm saying this in order to send a message. How important is it, not only the expression of solidarity with Ukraine, which we feel very strongly, but how important is a real military assistance to Ukraine in order to not to attack Russia or anybody else, in order to defend ourselves, nothing more. Also, I would like to say that in fact, NATO organized airlift bridge from NATO countries to Ukraine with military ammunition and military hardware. Also, I would like to say that we are now managed to organize and to be a part of a very strong non-military activity around Ukraine and around Russian threats. For example, I never saw such unprecedented diplomatic activity in Ukraine and around Ukraine, before. For example, today we have President of France, Macron, in Kiev, and 3 foreign ministers, as I referred to, including Austrian foreign minister. So not a single day goes without the contacts, personal contacts of president with over phone or visiting delegations, or like Turkish president recently. So no single day without the contacts of our foreign minister Dmytro Kuleba with foreign ministers. Either they are going abroad to meet the friends, or the friends are coming to Ukraine. So this is very important. Today, for example, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany visited the front line in Donbass. So this is a vivid example of the support and solidarity we are enjoying from our friends. Don't forget that the public opinion polls proves that more than 50% of Ukrainians are ready to resist with arms Russian invasion. More than 50%. So it is more than 10 million, adult people. And of course, this proves that it will not be an easy walk for Russian troops trying to invade Ukraine. Last week, I was myself in Kiev. I did not find anything strange in the life of capital of Ukraine. In the shops, in the streets, nothing special. Although there are drills being conducted by the authorities of Kiev and other cities. The bomb shelters are being checked and prepared for just in need. So that means that Ukraine is not sitting and relying on the good words from our good friends. We are doing our job, and we are grateful to our friends for their support and assistance.
Yeah, I only can back what you have said from my own experience. I had the privilege in the last years to have some speeches and workshops at the National Defense University in Kiev. Once we met even there just by chance, and my impression was, if I compare the shape of Ukrainian military attitude, 10 years ago and now, there is quite a big difference, The officers certainly have gained on self-awareness, on motivation, and positive perspectives, and also on quality. This was obvious. And insofar, one certainly must not underestimate. And there's another reason, why Putin, of course, should consider not only once or twice, but many times what he will be doing, because just the size of the country. Ukraine is, after Russia, the biggest European country, with a size of more than 600,000 square kilometers. This means around about double the size of Germany. It is not easy, to occupy such a country. And even if he would try, just to capture the capital and maybe the southern coast to the Black Sea region, this would mean, of course, that he would have a very hard stance. That's what I see. One question comes very often in our discussions, especially in a country like Austria with a neutral experience. They say, why doesn't Ukraine just become a neutral country like Austria or Finland or whatever? Why do they want to get into NATO? What is the reason behind it?
First, as I started from the very beginning, Russians are crazy about the problem of national identity And for us and Russians, you know, this is the confrontation of existential nature for centuries. That's why we don't expect that Russians will stop their, aggressive policy. I'm of the opinion that Russians are behaving the way for centuries. If you will allow them to take a finger, they will eat the whole arm. This is their, psychology. So that's why I think that we have to be ready to defend ourselves always. And at the same time, why Ukraine should not be like Austria or Finland, a neutral state. Can you imagine that by the time of Russian aggression in 2014, Ukraine was legally non-alignment country, proclaiming its neutrality, and it was done by Yanukovych. Yanukovych imposed such decision to the parliament at that time, to the parliament of Ukraine, and the parliament of Ukraine declared that Ukraine is non-aligned country or neutral country. So did it stop Putin from making an aggression? No, it did not. Putin made an aggression against legally neutral country. So that's why there is no such luxury like neutrality for such country as Ukraine. As you yourself mentioned, that Ukraine is one of the biggest country in Europe. And of course, it is the subject of military adventures from the neighboring Russia. Because unlike any democratic country in Europe or in the United States, Russia was, is, and will be aggressor. And this has been proven by the history. Let us take the Second World War. Who was trying to divide the continent? Stalin and Hitler. What came out of it? It is well known. So there should be no new Munich deal, because the Munich deal led to a disaster in Europe. So that's why we do not expect our friends, be it in NATO or in the European Union, will not commit the mistake. And they are not committing mistake. And this has been proven by the concerted position between the United States and NATO, and between the United States and the European Union. So this is very important. Very important is transatlantic link. Only strong transatlantic link will make Europe stronger and will not allow Russia to pursue their policy, their aggressive policy.
Yeah. I mean, what somebody can maybe understand is, that for Russian security interests, that they would be interested that there was no placement of, NATO missiles on Ukrainian soil or something like that. But just a membership is something different, because usually countries are joining the alliance for their own security. And if you compare the situation between Russia and Ukraine, nobody can really tell you that Ukraine will endanger Russia by its military potential. And if you look also, to the very spare military distribution of NATO battalions in Eastern Europe, whether this is in the Baltic states or in Poland, this is more or less just the presence of soldiers in order that NATO is there and that the NATO treaty will more or less fulfill its function. There is no aggressive troop positioning from the NATO side, as I can say. And then so far, I would say, I mean, if there are open questions from the Russian side, they easily can be more or less discussed and also resolved, as far as I see it. But this does not mean that there's an aggression against the country, really a reason in order to build up such a military potential. And I just want also to go back just 1 minute, what was your experience in the 90s, the so-called Budapest Protocol, when Ukraine, that after the dissolvement of the Soviet Union, was more or less the second nuclear power, or the third biggest nuclear power of the world.
Sure.
Yeah. What happened then? Maybe you can tell us a little bit, and what was granted in this moment.
Well, during these recent weeks, a lot of comments are being made both in Ukraine and abroad about nuclear weapons in Ukraine. As a person who was personally involved into negotiations between between Ukraine, Russia, and the United States, I should say that both United States and Russia were united against any possibility to leave nuclear arsenal we have inherited from the former Soviet Union on our soil. Both were against. I must say, as a person who was involved into negotiations over these nuclear weapons, that it was no way, nobody, including in NATO, was ready to agree with new nuclear power, Ukraine. And this might have destroyed the composition of the post-World War globe, because it was based on 5 nuclear powers, at the same time permanent representatives, permanent members of the UN Security Council, because of nuclear status. So for me, as a Ukrainian diplomat, it was clear at that time, after very, very thorough discussions, that for us in Ukraine, we had 2 alternatives. One alternative, to keep the nuclear weapons, but to be subordinated to Moscow, because all the controls were in Moscow. We did not have any technical possibility to maintain the nuclear warheads. We were producing the intercontinental ballistic missiles for these warheads, the best, by the way, in the former Soviet Union, which was referred to in the West as Satan, SS-24. But we did not possess any technology for producing nuclear warheads. So the second alternative was to get rid of nuclear weapons, but to have in exchange our real independence from Russia. So that's what we did. There was no other third alternative. Only one alternative. Either you have nuclear weapons and to be the part of Moscow, or you will not have nuclear weapons but be independent state. So this was the dilemma. Of course, many people are not aware of the circumstances in which we were discussing and negotiating the fate of nuclear arsenal in Ukraine, the 3rd largest in the world. at that time, more than 2,000 nuclear warheads on our territories, with 175 intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the newest one, 40 of them, with 10 nuclear warheads. So, of course, theoretically speaking, if we go back 30 years ago, we would keep nuclear weapons in Ukraine. But who would allow this to happen? Neither United States nor Russia. So this was the dilemma we were facing, and finally this dilemma has contributed immensely to the global peace and security by making the world safer for more than 2,000 nuclear warheads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. This was something, I mean, what Ukraine could contribute to the global security. And this certainly was very important. And as far as I have understood, Russia and also the other powers granted more or less the borders and the integrity of the Ukrainian territory of the other side. How do you see that?
Well, once again, as a person who was personally negotiating this so-called Budapest Memorandum on National Security Assurances, I must say that this was one of the conditions for Ukrainian parliament to ratify the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Treaty as a non-nuclear power. This was the condition. And we, as diplomats, had no other choice but to negotiate. And these negotiations were very tough, very tough. And they lasted since August in the trilateral format, from August 93 till December 94. So almost 1 year and a half. And negotiations were very tough, and one of the preconditions we put forward to both United States and Russia to give us national security assurances. Mm-hmm. Our position was crystal clear. We were insisting on having legally binding document with due ratification by parliaments of 3 member states: United States, Russia, and Ukraine. Unfortunately, both United States and Russia refused to talk about the legally binding document. Instead, they decided and they suggested to have national security assurances, which is not equal to national security guarantees in English. But in both Russian and Ukrainian language, official language is national security guarantees. Гарантии национальной безопасности in Russian, гарантии национальной безопасности in Ukraine. So this was a kind of diplomatic trick. Some people say, look, there are no guarantees neither from United States nor from Russia. But what about the signatures of the leaders of 3 states? In the international politics, it cannot be done so that the leaders are signing the document and disregarding it. So it used to be the case in the previous, in the last century, but it should not be the case at all in the new era. So we were expecting that both United States and Russia will abide by their commitments according to the Budapest Memorandum on National Security Assurances. As one of the authors of this document, I would say that the reaction of the United States from the very beginning was not very clear and not very understandable. For example, for me, the question mark raised in 2014 after Russia invaded Donbass. Why the United States are not that active to remind Russia about their commitment to territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine? Why not? why United States have not joined the European leading nations like France and Germany in participating in the conflict resolution. Because I'm of the opinion that without the United States, neither Germany nor France, even together, cannot establish a counterbalance to aggressive Russia. Only one country can do this. That is the United States. So that's why I think that this was a terrible strategic mistake on the part of the United States and Washington not to participate in the peaceful settlement of the conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that brings me also to the question. I mean, what can we do now? When I say we, then I mean European Union, the member countries, and of course also the NATO countries in this situation to help to prevent the war, to help to stabilize the situation. And how do you see, I mean, how effective are the instruments and measures that are used up to now?
Well, it seemed to me that after 8 years of Russian aggression, major global players finally understood that without stopping aggressive Russia, there will be no peace and stability, not only in Europe, but in the world. And the issues of Syria, Libya, Venezuela is proving that Russians are trying to act as the former Soviet Union. So that's why I am of the opinion that the NATO during this recent, I would say, months or 2 months is doing everything possible in order to stop Russia. So NATO, despite of its rejection of Russian policy, decided to sit at the table with Russia in the so-called Russian NATO Council. And there was a meeting, and NATO, and with the leading position of the United States, is not stopping its activities in sending the right signals to Russia. So in the given situation, NATO is not ready to involve into the military warfare with Russia. And I think that Russia is not also dreaming of this. But at the same time, the messages which are being sent from both NATO and the European Union are very clear, crystal clear. And the package of sanctions which have been prepared by the United States and the European Union countries, member states, is very impressive. And the discussion within the European Union, NATO, and with the United States going on. So, and there were a lot of warnings to Russia, to Moscow. Do not dare to attack Ukraine. If you attack Ukraine, you will face a very resolute response from NATO, the European Union, and other countries.
Yeah, maybe this was a second strategic mistake of Putin. He certainly gave back the very strong reason why for NATO. I mean, if you just think of the way Macron called NATO, brain death, he used as a notion, now nobody is talking about a brain death, but everybody is talking about, okay, the strength and the need for and the necessity of such an organization. This certainly is quite important. So let us go maybe to a last question. And this question is, what do you see as the main lessons one can take out of this crisis? What are the consequences that should be taken?
Um, very provocative question, Werner, I would say. But I have two, the lessons learned by whom? From my point of view, the lessons learned by Ukraine and the lessons learned by our friends in NATO and in the European Union. So one single lesson common for both Ukraine and our friends in NATO and the European Union is never trust Russia. This relates to both Ukraine and NATO and the European Union. Because, the Macron just returned from Moscow and said that Putin promised not to make any military maneuvers around Ukraine. In a couple of hours later, the Kremlin dissuaded such assertions, saying that no, Putin did not say anything of a kind. So that is another proof. Do not trust Russia. This is the first lesson learned. The second lesson learned, Russia respect the force. Russia respect the strong. And in order to live with Russia, both Ukraine and NATO and all countries together have to be strong in order to not to give even Russians a chance to think about any other military adventure. For Ukraine, another lesson learned. This is the consistent policy of reforms, strong economy, and reliable partnership with our foreign friends. So this is the lessons Ukraine have to learn from this yet another. For the NATO countries, the lesson learned, and it is being, and there are indications that it is being learned, to keep strong transatlantic ties. These are, to my mind, just a few lessons learned in Ukraine and among our friends.
Yeah, thank you very much for this outlook. If I may add, maybe also my own position, what I see. So one of the lessons certainly is similar to you: do not neglect your own security and defense matters. People usually tend, in times of periods of peace, rather neglect the security sector. But you have to be aware that a crisis can come very easily and very strongly, and then you have to be prepared. The other one certainly is what we might also take out. And, if you look at Putin's requests now in this situation, he does not only endanger Ukraine, but he also is asking or requesting, a rollback of the whole security development of the last more than 20 years. And this certainly is something very specific. This would mean that if NATO would leave the Baltic countries, that they are open for any aggression similar to Ukraine at the moment, that the situation for Poland would become much, much more difficult, that we would have probably also similar developments in other regions. And I do not want just, to end with negative aspects concerning Russia. I also would say, okay, if there are questions like, as an example, the stationing of missiles in specific regions, one should talk about it. Of course, we are interested in cooperation with all European countries, but the precondition is that we are ready to live with the same model, a peaceful model, a non-aggressive model. It is not possible in the 21st century anymore to make power politics in Europe as it was usual in the 90s or maybe in the 20th century. And this should be a lesson, we have to stick with. And this means that we have to have a very strong and clear stance in this situation. Whether you are a friend for a Russian nation and state, or whether you prefer the Ukrainians or any other people, this does not matter. But to have a rule-based international order, an order that is respected by everybody, the big powers just in the same way as by the middle and the small powers. And this should be a lesson that we have to take the consequences of. Be firm, clear, and strong in your will to defend those principles. And insofar, I really want to thank you, Borys, for your spontaneous readiness to be with us, to answer the questions, and also to look into the future. And I'm sure we will meet again. For our followers, I just want to announce next week we will have another talk. We will have a talk on Kosovo and the stability in southeastern Europe, and it can become quite interesting once again, because we also will have the opportunity of taking part, Lucas Mantel taking part. He's the responsible man in European Parliament for Kosovo, and also the Kosovo ambassador will be there. And insofar, we will have different aspects, from the neighborhood, from the Brussels side, and from the national side. Okay. So once again, thank you so much, Borys, for your taking part, for your analysis, for everything you are doing, and especially also for this excellent cooperation.
Thank you, Werner. Thank you for this nice opportunity to have a chance to communicate with you, to discuss with you the issues of European security. I cannot but agree 100% with your conclusion you made. Thank you once again. And Kosovo is a different story. So we have different views on Kosovo. I was from the very beginning against creation of a new state, which is still the problem for not only for Ukraine, but for many countries.
Okay. Thank you also for your openness in this case. And this shows very clearly how important it is to discuss international affairs, and especially the security questions in the future. Thank you. And I also want to say heartily goodbye to all our followers, and hopefully meet next week or the week thereafter. We will continue our talks, and I'm sure there will be quite some interesting questions on the table. Thank you and goodbye.
Dank u wel. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen. Ja. Dobry wieczór.